Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Anette Olzon, titled Shine. But first, let me take you back 7 years, when word first broke that the symphonic metal band Nightwish had hired a new lead singer, with a former frontwoman of Allison Avenue, Anette Olzon. And at that moment, the Nightwish fan base split into 3 distinct parts. The first were the fans of Tarja Turunen, who were incensed that she had been fired and took a while to come along to the new singer, if they did at all. Now the second were very much pro-Anette, embraced the rougher, looser tone that Nightwish took for those next 2 albums, and really enjoyed her more dynamic stage presence when she performed live. And the third group, where I would count myself, had realized that Nightwish had always been the brainchild of keyboardist and songwriter Tuomas Holopainen, and the band was still capable of making great music regardless of who was the frontwoman of the band. And with that in mind, acknowledging that particular change in direction, I like music that was made by both incarnations of the band, with Tarja and with Anette. Now, fast forward to October of 2012, when news broke mid-tour that Anette Olzon had been dismissed from Nightwish and had been replaced by female singers from tourmates Camelot and later by Floor Jansen, who I knew from Arion. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole back and forth drama of the whole endeavor, but I will say this. From what I know of Tuomas and how he runs Nightwish, I was disappointed, but not exactly surprised. But just like Tarja had done ahead of her, Anette Olzon made the choice to strike out on her own and release a solo album. And I gotta admit, I wasn't expecting much. Let's face it took Tarja 3 albums to hammer out a working formula, and Anette had never been responsible for any of Nightwish's songwriting. Furthermore, the buzz was suggesting this album, it wasn't a metal or even a hard rock record like she had made with either of her previous bands. So I wasn't really sure what to expect. So, going in, how was Shine? Well, it's pretty damn good. In fact, it was a pleasant surprise that given my low expectations for this record, Shine by Anette Olzon actually turned out to be a fair bit better than what I was expecting. And while it's not great, it's probably on par with Tarja's solo debut album, My Winter Storm, and indeed shares a fair few things in common with that record, primarily in some of the lyrics and themes, albeit with a very different sound. And while I can't say it's better than any of the material that she did do with Nightwish, it's still very good and it's still worth your time. So, okay, let's start out with Anette Olzon herself, and honestly, no complaints. She's a great singer, and I've always been a fan of her vocal delivery. She always struck me as a very emotive singer, and that does this album a lot of favors when attempting to convey the pretty complex emotional journey that she takes on this record. I guess if I were to level a complaint here, is that most of her belting range is confined to the backing choral sections, and the production there is never quite as organic as I would prefer, but really, in comparison with the bigger production issues on this album, that's a fairly minor issue, and that's only me wanting to see more of her singing. Because, okay, if we have to talk about a weak point on this album, the production definitely stands out, not in the right way. The percussion varies between live drums and stiff, inorganic drum machines. The synth lines can feel a little watery and a little too electronic at points, and there are moments where the album feels a little bit more compressed than it really should in order to sound a little louder and rougher, but all of it pales to the electric guitar production, and here, whether it was a slip-up in the mixing booth or Olzon's personal choice, but the guitars feel absolutely crushed by the mix, and they don't feel cohesive whatsoever. And while I know she was going for a softer sound overall on this album, and that does show in the beautifully textured acoustic guitars and the strings, but the harder guitars feel leaden and shoved to the back of the mix, only providing moments of sizzle on tracks that it really could have used a lot more driving guitar presence. The problem comes in the moments where we expect explosive payoff to the crescendos that build on some of these tracks with said guitars, and we just get nothing, which can lead to a real feeling of inertia on some of these tracks. The low point for me being the title track, which really does not help this album's forward momentum. It doesn't start off especially strong. It also doesn't help matters that some of the melodies are not stellar, especially near the beginning of the album with the excess of minor keys that never really rise above the sullen musings that recall bad Evanescence tracks. And then we have odd songs like Floating, which I think has a certain charm to it, with the repeating synth line, but I could definitely see it working with a bit of more organic melodic choice. Frankly, the closer that this album sticks to folk rock, the richer the sounds and the richer the production, and honestly, the better they are for it. Now, of course, this takes us to the lyrics, and thus where I feel that embracing some of the louder, more metal-inspired side, it could have helped this album a little bit more. Let's be honest, symphonic metal lyrics have a reputation for being terribly ridiculous or ridiculously terrible, and for a less experienced songwriter like Olzon, it would have given her the excuse of bombast to excuse some of the weaker lyrics on this album. And let's be honest, folk or alternative rock tend to demand a higher level of lyrical quality. That said, Anette Olzon isn't a bad lyricist, and she makes the rough simplicity of some of her material work through solid delivery and pretty decent technical songwriting. I'm not going to say that any of the songwriting here is going to blow you out of the water, because it won't, but it's not bad. Furthermore, she's smart enough not to indulge in crazy hyperbole or histrionics, and keeps the record grounded in her emotional journey, which can easily be extrapolated on some songs to discuss her struggles of how she's now on her own away from Nightwish as a group. And yeah, there's angst here, and there are early moments of denial against that angst or fleeting flights of escapism. In other words, the title track and Floating, they do feel a little bit misplaced in the overall arc of the album, especially considering that all the minor tones in Shine don't exactly make it a good self-esteem anthem. But where this album does shine is in the later moments of maturity, setting aside some of the angrier elements for moments of quiet gravitas. Invincible, for instance, it's a good love ballad that does feature a pretty okay guitar solo, which would have had more presence, but whatever. But it lacks a more powerful vocal performance from Olzon to really drive it past just being pretty solid on its own. Moving Away, on another hand, it's very bitter as a song, but it does imply that Olzon is moving away from the personal tragedy. She's moving on, and it does build to one of the more satisfying, dramatic crescendos on the album. And Watching Me From Afar is, it's probably the best song on the album, both by virtue of being the most organic and actually suggesting some closure and freeing her from her fears. What works about this is twofold. Not only does it add a satisfying emotional through line throughout the album and does provide some decent dramatic payoff, but it never feels petty or leave lingering resentments on the table towards Nightwish in any definite form, provided you choose to interpret the album in that particular way. And the fact that she does opt for a more vague storytelling, you know what, I'll argue that does work in her favor here. She has a certain degree of simplicity, but by not going for direct pointed detail, it works in centering the overall emotional core of the album. So you know what, in the end, I did enjoy Shine by Anette Olzon. It's not perfect, and there are definitely moments that feel a little bit amateurish and a little shaky, especially in the production, but for the most part, I'd argue that this album sticks the landing, at least for me. For me, it's a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. Once again, I would have a hard time saying that I like this material more than some of the songs that she did with Nightwish, but it's very different and it does work for what it's trying to be. And I respect what she's trying to do in this amount of effort that she's putting forward, and it's definitely worth a few listens. So you should all go check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to cover in coming weeks, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark. I'll see you next time.